The weird history of England's kings and queens. When we think of British royalty, we think of dignity, grace, shiny crowns, people who sip tea with their pinkies out and wave like their wrist is on a hinge. We don't usually think of exploding corpses, cannibalism, purple urine, or death by eel overdose. But maybe we should. Because if you peel back the velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace, history gets weird. Fast. Today, we are diving into the medical charts, the diaries, and the autopsy reports of the English monarchy. From the king who hunted witches to the queen who loved cocaine, this is the weird history of England's kings and queens. Let's start at the beginning. William the Conqueror, the guy who conquered England in 1066. Big deal, right? Well, literally, he was a big deal. By the end of his life, William had gained a massive amount of weight. He was so large that the King of France actually made a joke that William looked like a pregnant woman about to give birth. William was so offended he went to war over it. But karma is swift. During a battle in 1087, William's horse reared up, jamming the saddle pommel deep into his gut. It ruptured his intestines. It was a slow, agonizing, and very smelly way to go. He died weeks later, but the fun didn't stop there. By the time they got him to the church for the funeral, the body had been decomposing for a while. Gases had built up inside him. He was essentially a royal balloon. The stone sarcophagus they had built for him was too small for his bloated body. The gravediggers tried to force him in. They pushed, they shoved, and then, pop! The King of England exploded. His stomach burst, spraying putrid fluids all over the priests and the mourners. The smell was so bad that people ran out of the church screaming. They had to rush through the rest of the funeral in record time. Talk about going out with a bang. Moving on to his son, Henry the Fur. Henry didn't explode, but he did have a problem with portion control, specifically with a creature called the lamprey. If you haven't seen a lamprey, it looks like a vacuum cleaner hose possessed by a demon. But in medieval England, they were a delicacy. Henry's doctors told him, "Your Majesty, you are old. Please stop eating the nightmare eels. They make you sick." Henry said, "YOLO," and ate a massive meal of them anyway. The history books literally record his cause of death as a surfeit of lampreys. That is fancy talk for he ate too many eels and died of diarrhea. Fast forward to 1603. Enter James I, the guy who authorized the King James Bible. He was also incredibly gross. James reportedly hated water. And I don't mean he didn't like swimming. I mean he never bathed. A courtier once noted that his skin was as soft as taffeta sarcenet, which sounds nice, until you realize it was because he never washed his hands. He just rubbed them on wet napkins. He also had a tongue that was too big for his mouth, causing him to constantly drool on himself and his drink. But his hygiene wasn't the weirdest part. James was obsessed with witches. He wrote a literal book on it called Demonology. He personally interrogated women accused of witchcraft. He was so paranoid about assassins that he wore padded doublets, thick clothing, that made him look huge, just in case someone tried to stab him. So imagine a drooling, unwashed man in a puffy coat screaming about witches. That was the king. Charles II is known as the Merry Monarch because he brought partying back after Oliver Cromwell banned fun. But Charles had a dark secret in his medicine cabinet. In the 1600s, there was a medical fad called corpse medicine. Doctors believed that consuming human body parts could cure illness. Charles II was a huge fan. He had his own personal laboratory where he distilled a tincture called the King's Drops. The main ingredient? Human skull. Specifically, the skull of a person who had died a violent death, because they thought the vital life force would still be trapped in the bone. So, the King of England was technically sipping on skull juice to cure his headaches. You know George III as the guy who lost America in Hamilton. But he was suffering from something much worse than a rap battle loss. George suffered from bouts of madness that left him in straitjackets. Historians now think he had porphyria, a blood disease, or possibly arsenic poisoning from his wig powder. One of the key symptoms? His urine turned blue or purple. During his episodes, he would talk for hours until he foamed at the mouth. He once wrote a sentence that was 400 words long. He supposedly tried to shake hands with a tree because he thought it was the King of Prussia. It's tragic, really. But it also means the Declaration of Independence was essentially signed because a guy with purple pee was too distracted to manage the colonies. Finally, we have Queen Victoria, the stern grandmother of Europe. She looks like she would disapprove of your loud music. In reality, Victoria loved drugs. When she had period cramps, her doctor prescribed her cannabis. When she gave birth, she became the first royal to use chloroform, which the church hated because pain was God's will, but Victoria said, no thanks. Later in life, she also enjoyed Vin Mariani, a wine laced with a heavy dose of cocaine. So, that grumpy lady in the photos? There is a solid chance she was high as a kite. She was also a speed eater. Royal protocol stated that once the queen finished eating, everyone else's plate had to be taken away immediately. Victoria ate so fast that slow eaters often went hungry at her table. King John lost the literal crown, jewels in some quicksand called the Wash. They have never been found. Edward II, legend says he was killed by a red-hot poker up the rear end. Historians debate this, but it's a pain in the butt of a theory. Elizabeth I wore makeup made of lead and vinegar that slowly poisoned her and ate her skin away. Richard the Lionheart spent only 6 months of his 10-year reign actually in England. He hated it there. So, the next time you see a royal wedding or a coronation, just remember, beneath the gold and the glamour, there's a history of exploding bodies, eel overdoses, and skull juice smoothies. If you enjoyed this royal roast, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you rather eat a surfeit of lampreys or wear lead makeup?